No, please. I've heard it before. Of course. Come on.
Come on, stop the applause. I can't take it anymore. Good evening. My name is Charlie Bass. Some of you may perhaps remember that a very, very long time I was privileged to represent the second great city in the U.S. for 14 years. Since I left the U.S. Congress in 2013, I have not been to a single political event because I believe that once the voters give you a message, it is time to do something else. But I stand here before you tonight to endorse Governor Christie for President of the United States. See, this is an envelope. I got here 5 words to describe Governor Christie. Courageous. He's fearless. He speaks truth. He believes in the rule of law. He's experienced.
You're allowing us to ask the questions, and your answers are genuine. Maybe we agree, maybe we don't agree on everything. That's fine, but they're genuine. A lot of the Republicans, they differ here or there on the policies a little bit for the most part. But for the Republican Party, we know what we want to be. We need this country fixed. We need the elites of Washington to stop who are frankly standing on the shoulders of the Americans that built this country, the Americans that defend this country, and then they're telling those folks that they're standing on the shoulders of how to live their lives. Not anymore. This is the opportunity to take it back, and not just impose our will on the people that's not what it's about. Their will versus our will. It's the Republican Party saying, it's your will. What do you want to do with your life? What are the opportunities we're going to create for you or your family or business? We don't necessarily have all the solutions for you, but we're going to create all these doors of opportunity. And then last time I checked, live free or die. You walk through whatever door you want. That's what conservative values are. Sending the power and the control back to the states, sending more of the budget authority back to the states instead of having this one-size-fits-all authoritarian rule out of Washington. That is a failed model. It really is. So this is why this election is so important. And getting someone that not just believes in a lot of these conservative ideas that we have, these fundamentals, that the founding fathers brought into the mix when they created the Constitution, not just believes in it, but as a strategy to implement it. And that's where I always, harp with the governors. We kind of joke and giggle to ourselves. Look at these fools in Washington. They actually think they know what they're doing. They've never managed anything, a lot of them. Governors have to manage 24/7. We can't just talk a good game. We're absolutely accountable to our word. When there's emergency or crisis, it's the governors that they look to. And so we have to build great teams. We have to build consensus. We have to make sure we get stuff done. One thing I say in politics is you never blame somebody else for not getting stuff done, right? Good leadership gets stuff done no matter what hand they're dealt. Sometimes you got a good hand, sometimes you got a bad hand, but either way, I know I can get a win out of this one way or another. That's what leadership does. They don't accept the losses. They're always working to find a new way and a new strategy. So we had a lot of ideas. Remember this whole idea we're going to secure the southern border? Yeah, it didn't happen. It didn't happen, right? You can't blame other people for it not happening, right? You can blame Republicans is what I say. We didn't get it done. We were going to be fiscally disciplined. Yeah, Washington, D.C., fiscally disciplined. Are you kidding me? What a joke. And that's your money. They think it's their money. It is your money. It is your hard-earned dollars. Those are the hours that you spent away from your family, working hard, making a sacrifice, and sending it down to Washington saying, gee, I hope to God they finally will spend my hard working dollars responsibly. They don't do it. They've never done it. They haven't done it for years. We have an opportunity to get somebody in there, a governor, that understands what fiscal discipline is all about. So huge opportunities there. We can go on and on. Chris has been great. He's I think you're almost a citizen. I mean, you've been in the state so long. Seriously, he's done so many visits all over the state, North Country, from Colebrook all the way down to Claremont, to Portsmouth, to Keene, all over. He's done big groups like this. He's done small living rooms. He's willing to go anywhere, and that's exactly what we want with our candidates, right? Folks that really take the time with us as individuals, because if they can do that, if they can get the retail politics right, then there's really hope that we're going to get a retail manager, a president that manages, that really takes care of the free world, but does it with a sense and a style that the individual comes first. That's what Live Free or Die is all about. That's in our DNA, and that's the demand that we make out of our presidential candidate. So it's an awesome responsibility. I've gotten to introduce Chris a few times. Like I said, my sense is there could be a few more here because the guy just he's pounding it out. He's putting the shoe leather in, if so to say. They're nice shoes. Are they Italian? They're probably Italian. There you go. He doesn't complain about our cold weather, which I love. He's got thick blood, which I love. And he's always willing to do anything, not for himself, but really for making sure that we as individuals and as citizens have a voice wherever this thing may go. So with that, I'm going to introduce the man himself, Christie. All right.
Thank you. Thank you very much. First, I want to thank Congressman Bass. It really means a great deal when somebody who has been in the wars, who's been in the battles, who knows what it's like to run for office, who's won and lost, and knows that winning is definitely much better than losing, and who does all those things, decides in as divided a country as we have right now, that they're willing to stick their neck out and be with somebody. I remember back 8 years ago when I ran, we had 31 Republican governors in this country, and 3 of us were running. There were 28 governors available to endorse. And I talked to Governor Sununu about this. Only 4 did of 28. I got 3 of those endorsements. Paul LePage from up there in Maine, Charlie Baker from next door in Massachusetts, and Larry Hogan from down in Maryland. And John Kasich got 1 governor, Governor Bentley of Alabama, to endorse him. All the other governors stood on the sidelines, and they said, let me just see how it plays out. If I had $1 for every time one of my fellow governors said to me, let me see how it'll play out, I wouldn't have had to raise money at all. Because they were scared. They were scared to take a stand. And I've never understood that. I didn't understand it back then. And that's why when someone does take a stand, like Charlie Bass is taking a stand for me tonight, I appreciate it so much because it's not easy. It takes courage. He'll take criticism from some. He'll take great joy from Mary Pat when she's up here the next time. I guarantee you that. She's getting ready for 25 that we're hosting for Thanksgiving on Thursday. So she sends her apologies, but she said someone has to do the real work while I'm up here having fun. So Congressman Bass, thank you so much for your support. We're going to give you a campaign you'll be really proud of. So thank you, Charlie. Very much. And to that guy who wandered in off the street to introduce me tonight, the governor, I have to tell you, he's right, by the way, about governors. You know, we don't have anybody to pass the buck off to. I learned that most particularly when Hurricane Sandy hit my state 11 years ago. And when it did, I remember going the first morning to the Emergency Operations Center after the hurricane hit. It was a 15-minute drive from the governor's mansion to the Emergency Operations Center normally. It was an hour and 10 minutes that morning because of how many roads were closed. We were driving over people's lawns just to try to get around things. It was an incredible sight. And when I got there, I had my cabinet around the table, and they all reported the list of horribles to me. 346,000 homes destroyed. Every major highway in the state obstructed. No operational water treatment or wastewater treatment plants in the entire state. 61 gas stations open in the entire state of 9.2 million people. Every school in the state closed. One after another of problems. And they all went around the table and told me how many people were out of their homes. No power in 2/3 of the state. So over 6.5 million people were without power. And they all get done saying all these horrible things. And then they all get quiet and stare at me. That's when you know you're governor. And that's what Chris is talking about, is that there's no one to pass the buck to. At that moment, you understand that the responsibility you asked for from the voters is real. And you've got to be the guy or woman who comes up with the plan. And you have to take responsibility for what's going to happen or not happen. And I've watched him do that during COVID. And he never backed down from a tough decision. He never passed the buck to somebody else. I watched him over and over make the difficult decisions that needed to be made during an extraordinary crisis, not only for the people of New Hampshire, but for our whole country. And we've each gone through it. And we know what it's like to have to be the person in the chair to make the decisions. So when he comes here tonight to introduce me and says I'm one of the people that he thinks could be president, that means a great deal, because that's coming from somebody who's done it, who understands what it's like to make those decisions. And yeah, listen, I wish I was a citizen up here. If I was, I'd be paying a lot less in taxes than I'm paying back in New Jersey. I guarantee that. If we can work that out, I think we'd all be, Mary Pat would be thrilled. But the fact is that he and I have known each other now for over a dozen years. We've gone through a lot of these wars together. When I was chairman of the Republican Governors Association, and then thereafter when he got elected, you know, we stood up for each other every time that we needed to, because we believe in the same principles. And the things he talked about tonight, I believe in as well. And so I can't thank him enough. Like, he's running around being the gracious New Hampshire host and making sure that he gives everybody a chance to listen to what he's got to say. And if you're a smart politician, you will listen, because the guy's won a lot up here. And I'm essentially now running for governor of the Republican primary, and I want to win that one. And I'm going to follow his example of making hard decisions, speaking the truth, and taking responsibility for what happens. So, Gov, thank you for coming tonight. Stay as long as you can, and I understand you got other stuff to do too. So thank you for coming. Look, this is the most serious time for our country, I think, since I was a teenager. Now, I'm not going to make you guess how old I am. That was in the late 1970s. And you remember back to those times, right? Double-digit inflation, double-digit unemployment, double-digit interest rates, hostages in Iran, Soviet army in Afghanistan, the Cold War at its height, with the nuclear threat from the Soviet Union significant. And that's when I was going off to college. I went to college as a freshman in September of 1980, just having turned 18 years old, my third day of college. And I got to tell you, it was not a very hopeful time in the country, and it was a scary time. And it was a scary time to be a young person and think about, well, what's your future going to be like? Where's our country going? And can we get over all these problems? And at the time, quite frankly, we had a president who told us it was our fault, that there was a malaise in the country. And it wasn't very hopeful to me. And so as I was sitting down in my dorm room at the University of Delaware, trying to figure out who was I going to vote for, it became pretty clear that in the first chance I had to vote in my life was a presidential race. And the guy who gave me hope was Ronald Reagan. He didn't pretend the problems were too big for any group of people to solve. In fact, he told us the opposite, that we had the ability to solve these problems if we were going to work together and work hard enough, and we had the right leadership. He understood back then, just as it's become now, the government is not the solution to our problems. The government is the problem, because we had let it run out of control. Like we let it run out of control in this post-COVID period now. Spending too much, involved in people's lives too much, dictating to people what they can and can't do and what they should and shouldn't believe. And Ronald Reagan was my first vote. And it's still my proudest vote that I've ever made for president of the United States, was voting for Ronald Reagan in 1980. And he came in and he proved once again to the country that the presidency is a job that can be done. The presidency is something that can change the direction of our country and improve the lives of our people. At a time when we're at our greatest risk, the American people made a really smart choice. They picked a conservative Republican governor from a blue state. Now, that's a self-interested comment, but it's still true. It's still true. Ronald Reagan from blue California. Why was that important? Because he understood exactly what Chris just talked about and what he has to do here every day in a state that is purple. He doesn't have a legislature that does what he wants to do all the time. He doesn't have executive counselors who always say, oh, whatever you want, Governor, no problem. Senator Lang sitting here chuckling. Does Lang vote the way you need him to? You can tell me later. But Reagan was in California with a Democratic legislature. And so what he understood was a governor in that circumstance has to do two things. You have to use the bully pulpit to persuade the public to get behind more of your ideas than the other parties. And then you got to know how to make a deal. And we have lost both those abilities in Washington, D.C. We haven't had a president who could make a persuasive case to Congress since George W. Bush made a persuasive case after 9/11. Everybody since then, and even George W. Bush lost it a bit after 9/11 and lost his ability to do that when he tried to fix immigration and tried to fix Social Security and couldn't bring people around. And for God's sake, Barack Obama never cared about making that case. He spent, 3 years in Congress before he became president, never developed any relationships, and didn't care to develop when he was president. Donald Trump didn't care to develop any relationships with members of Congress. And that's why even when he had majorities in Congress in his first 2 years of his presidency, he didn't get the things done he promised us he would get done. And now poor Joe Biden, to the extent that he knows what's going on every day, he's not making it happen either because he doesn't have the energy any longer to get done what needs to get done. Ronald Reagan understood that this is still a people business. And he didn't agree with Tip O'Neill on much of anything, but he developed a relationship with him, and he made sure that they figured out how to get things done. And they did an immigration fix back then. They did a Social Security fix back then. They cut taxes. They strengthened our military. They increased our prestige all around the world, and they did it together. I know as we sit here right now, that seems impossible. You look at Washington, these jokers take a victory lap for not closing the government. and think like they deserve a big round of applause for that. Congratulations, you didn't close the government. You're supposed to be down there running. Well, I don't think that deserves any great round of applause. But they do, because they haven't had a president who has worked with them and made them understand that our job is to work for you, not the other way around. Our job is to make the tough decisions. I never thought I was going to run for president again, but I will tell you, when I saw what was happening in this country and I saw what was happening in our party, I could not stand on the sidelines and say this is someone else's responsibility. No one was willing to tell the truth about these things. They all want to be everything to everybody. You know, they go to one place, they say one thing, they go to another place, they say the other thing. Let me guarantee you something. You may not like everything I say. In fact, I'm pretty willing to bet that you won't like everything I have to say. But I'm willing to tell you this. When you're in Nashua, you're going to hear what I have to say. And when I was up in Keene, I said the same damn thing. When I'm in Manchester, I say the same thing. When I was in Portsmouth last week, I said the same thing. You're never going to have to wonder what I'm thinking. You have to wonder what I'm going to do. I'm going to do everything I can to do what I say I'm going to do. And I have a record to prove that I can do it. I had a Democratic legislature for every minute of all 8 years of my governorship. Every minute. I counted them. Every minute. For 8 years. And I will tell you, what I did was very much what Reagan did with Tip O'Neill. After I got elected, I went to see our Senate president, the most powerful person beside the governor in our state. And he was the president of the Iron Workers Union, another shy and retiring guy like me. So I went to see him. I just dropped in. Now, his office is 2.5 hours from where I live. And I just got in the car and said to the troopers, take me down to see Senator Sweeney. And they said, well, you don't have an appointment. I said, I think he'll see me. I'm the governor-elect. I think if I show up, he'll give me a couple minutes. And I made my way down there, and I walked into his office, and his secretary looked stunned. She said, well, governor-elect, so good to see you. You don't have an appointment, do you? I said, I don't, but I was in the neighborhood, and I thought, you know, I'd drop by and say hello to the senator. She said, well, let me go see if he's available. So she goes scurrying back, and out comes poor Steve. And now I know why he was embarrassed to come out. He had just gotten back from working out. He didn't expect anybody in the office. He was in sweatpants and a T-shirt and a baseball hat. He said, Governor-elect, I wasn't expecting you. And I said, no, I was in the neighborhood. He goes, your neighborhood's 2.5 hours away. What the hell are you talking about? And I said, Steve, you and I need to talk. Can we go in your conference room? I'll only take 5 minutes. We said, okay. Went in the conference room. I looked at him. I said, look, we can yell and scream at each other, argue and make headlines for the next 8 years. And he said 4 years. I said, no, 8 years. And I said, or you and I can look each other in the eye and say, we're going to try to put touchdowns in the end zone. Every week, every month, every year, put touchdowns in the end zone. And this I'll promise you. I said, if I give you my word on something, whether it turns out to be politically advantageous to me or not, I'll keep it. And if you do the same, we're going to be able to be successful. But that's up to you. I'm willing to do it. Are you? And he sat there for about 10 seconds, and he stood up, and he put out that big iron worker's hand, and he said, deal. Let's put touchdowns in the end zone. And for 8 years now, it wasn't like we got along the whole time. I remember going to the bottom of my driveway one morning on a Sunday, picking up the state's biggest newspaper, and the headline said, Sweeney, I want to punch Christie in the head. That was not like a highlight of our 8 years together. So we had our fights because we have differences. But every time when it came down to a big problem, I'd have him in my office, and if I was being unreasonable, he would look at me and say, remember, touchdowns in the end zone. Or I would do that to him. It was our code to each other from right in the beginning. And we'd snap each other back into a place where we said, okay, how do we make a deal? Everybody, that's what we need to get to in Washington, D.C. again. It's enough of digging our heels and saying my way or the highway. It's just not the way the government was designed to work. We need to have somebody who's willing to fight, use the bully pulpit, move things in our direction, and then someone who knows how to make the deal and make progress, put a touchdown in the end zone. And that's what I intend to do. I am running for president because I want to be a president of consequence. I'm running for president. We'll talk about this tonight because I want to do big things in the country, not the small things that we spend all of our time wasting our time talking about, the little things that just we go at each other on and we make little incremental progress. And at the end, you say, well, what the hell was that all about? We got big problems in this country and around the world. And we need somebody who is seriously willing to put their political capital on the line to make it happen. I did that when I was governor. I inherited an $11 billion deficit on a $29 billion budget from my predecessor. And everybody said he's going to have to raise taxes and he's going to be finished. And I said, no, you know, we're going to cut spending. And they said, you can't cut that much spending. Well, I went to something called zero-based budgeting. And I made every department come in and start at zero and justify every program they had to me. So we don't start from where we ended last year. We started zero. Man, you learn a lot. You know what we did because of that process? In 1 year, we eliminated 832 programs. 832 programs. Now, let me tell you the other thing that happens when you do that. My popularity went from 55% to 38%. Because every one of those programs got a constituency. Everybody, you know, somebody likes one of those programs. And when you do 832, that's a lot of ticking people off. But what I told them was, I promised you I wasn't going to raise taxes. I promised you I was going to balance the budget. And I promised you I was going to get government out of your life. This is what it looks like. And I got a Democratic legislature to pass that budget. Think about that. A Democratic legislature passed a budget that eliminated 832 programs. And I was at 38%. And I had a reporter say to me, I guess you're not serious about getting reelected. And I said, I got to tell you the truth, I don't really care. They said, come on, you're a politician. Of course you care. I said, not that much. And I made a joke about it. I said, you know, because I already get the portrait. I mean, like once you get elected once, man, they're going to paint a portrait of this. It's unbelievable, right? But I get the portrait already. You just got to win once. That portrait's going to hang in the State House for years and years and years. God willing, my grandchildren will go to that State House someday and see and go, the old man wasn't always nuts. He actually did something one day. Look at this. This is his portrait. This is what you got to think about, everybody. Once you're there, don't sell your soul for the little things, because all you're arguing about then is the little brass plaque at the bottom of the portrait. It doesn't say 4 years or 8 years. And I am not selling my soul for 4 years on a little brass plaque. And if I wasn't willing to do it for governor, hell, I get elected president and I can have a portrait in the White House. Who cares? And that's going to be there forever too. The point is, do things of consequence. And the last thing is this, and I'm going to take your questions, is you have to have someone, like I said earlier, who is willing to say what they mean and stand by it. Not just look in your eyes and say, I think I know what she wants me to say. Let me figure it out. I'll say it. And hopefully she's not paying attention when I say the opposite thing and hooks it next week. Right? That catches up to you. Catches up to you. We have candidates in this race who do that. We do. And beware of those folks, because you give them the power, they won't stand by anything they tell you. They'll do whatever is politically expedient at the moment. I have never done that, and I will never do that, because I'm a Republican from New Jersey. I am nearly an extinct entity anyway. So I am this close to death every day. So when you're that close to death, man, go for it. And that's the kind of president we need now. You look at everything that's going on in this world, that's the kind of president we need. I'm sure we'll talk about that stuff tonight too. So this is a great crowd. I'm really thrilled you all took time to be here tonight. The rules of my town hall are really easy. You raise your hand, I call on you, someone gives you a microphone so all these people with the cameras can hear you. And you ask a question, and an amazing thing is going to happen. I'm going to answer it. I'm not going to answer the question that I want to answer. I'm not going to answer the question that I wish you had asked. I'm not going to answer the question that someone on TV wants me to answer. You're here and you're going to get your questions answered. I can't guarantee you how much you're going to love the answer or not. We'll see, but you're going to get one. So who wants to start? Let's go. Yes, sir, right there. And she's got a microphone right behind you.
Well, we spoke before, Governor, and thank you very much.
Good to
But I
see
have
you
a
again.
very different question
All
for
right.
you this time. I think that the worst possible outcome in the general election would be that if no candidate wins the Electoral College with more than 50%. And we're headed into a possibility where if you get nominated, Trump runs, Kennedy runs, Manchin runs, we may very possibly see the House of Representatives choose our next president. What would you do to prevent that from happening?
Well, first of all, I don't share your pessimism in that regard. There are sore loser rules in over 30 states now in this country who say if you run in the primary, you can't now go after the primary's over and run as an independent. So if I beat Donald Trump in the primary, he ain't running. Or if he's running, he's only running in a few states that he won't be able to make a difference in the election. Second, if I'm the nominee, I can guarantee you Joe Manchin's not running for president. Okay? Not going to happen. Manchin was my mentor when I became governor from the National Governors Association. And we have a very good relationship. And I don't think that Joe Manchin's worried about Chris Christie being president. I think he's made it very clear with what he said. He's worried about Donald Trump being president, and he doesn't have confidence in Joe Biden either. I mean, who knows what Joe Manchin might do if I'm the nominee? Could get real interesting. We could have a little bipartisanship, for God's sake. So I don't share your concern. Here's where that concern really comes into play. If Trump is the nominee, because if Trump is the nominee, I bet you Manchin's going to run. And you could have a situation where nobody gets 270, and then it goes to the House of Representatives. And if you think our country's divided now, imagine when that happens. Those jokers took 3 weeks to pick a speaker. Imagine how long it'll take them to pick a president. And who knows where that'll end up. So I think your concern is right, but I think it's right in the wrong place. I think the way to avoid this is to not give the American people the choice they don't want. 75% of the American people say, we don't want it to be Trump and Biden again. Well, how about we listen to them? And that's our responsibility in our party, not to bang our head against the wall. Look, I want to be really clear about this because my opponents who are left in this race, the real ones that Sununu was alluding to when he was up here, right? Look, this race is now down in the Republican primary to 4 real candidates: Trump, me, Nikki Haley, and Ron DeSantis. I mean, nobody in this room, I think, really thinks Vivek Ramaswamy should be or is going to be president. If the criteria for president was to be the most obnoxious human being you've ever met in your life, he would be a runaway winner. You know how some people say, no, but when you meet him one-on-one about anybody, they're much better. I'm going to tell you, he's not. So that's not true either. There's 4 people left in this race, okay? I'm going to make this really clear because no one else will. Donald Trump is unfit to be president of the United States. He has given away his credibility that he'll serve the American people because all he's done is serve himself. And he's put himself first. Not only, let's get to the end, at the end, in the beginning, this guy had a Republican Congress. He said, he promised us he was going to repeal and replace Obamacare. And with the Republican Congress, he didn't. So now we have an even bigger government bureaucracy running healthcare in this country. Second, he said, and I was there, I was on the stage for 9 of those debates 8 years ago. And he said, we're going to secure our southern border by building a wall across the entire border between the United States and Mexico. And great news, Mexico is going to pay for it. Now, look, I knew that was bull at the time. And I said it at the time. But a majority of people actually believe that garbage. Now, he came back here and said, why would anyone believe I could get a country to pay for a wall on our property? I don't know, because you said it 8,000 times. in 2016 and said, you were the greatest deal maker of all time, and you were the only one who could get it done. Now he's saying we were stupid for believing him. Okay. Then he said, I'm a businessman. I know how to balance budgets. I'm going to balance the budget in 4 years. What did he do in 4 years? He added $7.8 trillion to the national debt, the most any president has added to the national debt in 4 years in the history of the country. So on the merits, he was a failure. And then you get to the end. That's okay. You can applaud for that. He's not here. You don't have to worry about him bursting through the room, all made up and everything, and start screaming, right? No. That'll come later. At the end is when he disqualified himself for the job. Okay? Every president has failures. If I'm president, I'll fail at some things. It's just the way it is. All that should tell you is how much you can believe his promises this time, based on what he didn't do the last time. But you cannot get in this business and decide that the only election that you'll accept is one you win. That the only election that's fair is the one I win. You can't go out behind the seal of the President of the United States in the East Room of the White House on election night and say the election was stolen when you have no evidence to prove it was. And in fact, we sit here now 3 years later and there's still no evidence the election was stolen. You want to know why? Because it wasn't. He lost. And here's the other thing. He knows he lost. I know he knows he lost. But he can't bear the fact that he lost to Joe Biden. I don't blame him. That's a tough loss. I mean, no one had ever lost outside the state of Delaware to Joe Biden ever. And he's the guy who did it. Then he sent this country and so many supporters of his down a road that's led many of them to prison. And more of them are going to go to prison because of what happened on January 6th. And people who worked right around him are now going to prison because he asked them to commit crimes on his behalf. And let me tell you what's going to happen this March. He's going to walk into a courtroom in Washington, D.C., and his own former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, has cut a deal for immunity, and he is going to testify as far away as I am from you. He's going to be from Donald Trump and saying, I committed crimes at his instruction, and he committed crimes right before my eyes. Now, let me ask you something, everybody. If that doesn't disqualify you from being president of the United States, what the hell does? I mean, what's left? We have to do better than that. But in this race, Sununu and I have been the only two people who even mentioned this. You know, I was on stage a week and a half or so ago at the debate in Miami. And I heard Nikki Haley say he was the right president for the right time. And I'd be inclined to pardon him if I were president. Well, let me make something really clear, everybody. I don't think he was the right president at the right time. I voted for him and I was wrong. Okay? And I ain't pardoning him if I'm president of the United States because he doesn't deserve one. You can't have it both ways. You can't say I'm running against the guy and then say he was the right president for the right time. If he was the right president, then why aren't you supporting him? And what will you do when you get there? This is the essence of the problem. People who want to have it both ways. It's hard. You may have seen me go down a couple of weeks ago to the Republican Party of Florida to speak at their convention. I got introduced. I went on the stage and started booing right away. I didn't even say anything yet. I usually get booed, but not till I start speaking. Nikki Haley didn't show up. Now, look, you got to be willing to answer these questions. And you got to take a stand. And sometimes it's going to be unpopular. And sometimes you're going to get booed. And if that is too tough for you, how are you going to stand up to Putin? How are you going to stand up to China? How are you going to stand up to the mullahs in Iran? How are you going to do that? If this is too hard, you can be sure as heck that's going to be too hard. So I'm going to be very clear. He's not qualified to be president. I believe he's going to be a convicted felon. And I'm not talking out of my hat. You all know I was the U.S. attorney in New Jersey for 7 years. I ran the 5th largest prosecuting office in this country for 7 years. And you know, in New Jersey, we have some of the greatest criminals in the world. Our criminals in New Jersey are so great, they make TV shows about them. People love our criminals. And I got to prosecute them. So I know what I'm talking about here. He's going to be convicted, everybody. And if we nominate him, do you think there's anything else Joe Biden and the Democrats are going to talk about from the minute he's convicted until the election happens? And then we're going to wind up with Joe Biden for another 4 years or so. And with Kamala Harris waiting in the wings, look, they're going to do things that we will not be able to recover from. So this is the moment. And I'm the one who's been willing to stand up to him from the minute I got into this thing. And I will continue. I didn't raise my hand on the stage in the first debate and say, I'll support him even if he's a convicted felon. But everybody else left in this race did. Everybody else left in this race raised their hand. So let's get that one out of the way early in the first question. That's where I stand. That's where I am. And that's where I will always be. And you will never have to doubt it. Next question. Yes, sir. Right there. Yep. She's going to give you a microphone too, right behind you. I don't think you need it either, but those camera guys will get really.
I'll appease them.
Yeah, appease the media.
Appease the media. Very good. So, what kind of deal do you think you need to cut if and when you become president in order to get term limits in place?
Oh,
How? What? Do you have to sacrifice a baby? Do you have to? What are you gonna do?
I might have to sacrifice all 4 of my kids. But they're older now. They've lived a good life. Look, that is the biggest, hardest problem, I think, for any president to solve, because you really have nothing to do with it. You just got to try to persuade the people who you want to subject the term limits to vote to term limit themselves. And let me tell you something. If I do that, I'm going to retire. I'm just going to go, good night, everybody. I'm going to walk back through the curtain and be done. I don't want to make you that promise. I believe in term limits. I will advocate for them. I've lived with them. New Jersey, we have 2 terms for a governor. After 8 years, I had to go. It makes no sense to me. I had a guy in my state legislature who has served for 50 years. 50. I remember seeing him one day in the hallway. I said, like, at 40, you couldn't get everything done you wanted to get done? Like, you need 50? I mean, it is bad, and it is corrosive in Washington because they become part of that culture. They live there. They forget where they've come from, and it's bad. I'll advocate for it as best I can. But if you ask me, do I have a strategy to do it, except to try to embarrass them into it, there's very little leverage to be able to get that done. And that's why it hasn't been done. And not only hasn't it been done there, notice the only place where there are term limits anywhere in this country are for presidents and governors. Why? Because the legislature voted term limits for presidents and governors. And then they say to them, well, are you going to sign it or not? And we sign it because it's the responsible and smart thing to do. So I wish I could tell you that I have a plan to do that. I can't, except to try to say you owe it to the people to be citizen legislators. That's what the founders intended, that you go like they did. I mean, George Washington had no term limits. He made it that way because he felt like 8 years was enough. You shouldn't stay longer. And every president till FDR followed that tradition. And it was only after FDR that we passed a constitutional amendment to require it. So we have a history of being able to do this, but the Congress has not been willing to do it. And I wish I could tell you I got like some, maybe hypnosis, something like that I can work on, do the watch back and forth. But this will be one of the biggest things to try to get accomplished. And it will be very, very difficult. I want to be honest with you about it. I wish I could tell you, oh, we'll get it done. Don't you worry. First 100 days. No, I'm going to try to use the bully pulpit to embarrass them into doing the right thing. And we'll see if I'm effective at it or not. I promise you this much. I will try. And I will try as hard as I can to get it done. See, I don't want to grip people back here. Yes, sir. Over here.
Governor, first of all, I'm a big fan. I've read both of your books and I highly recommend them.
Thank you.
In the spirit of bipartisanship, would you consider reaching across the aisle in terms of choosing various cabinet members?
Sure. And in fact, you don't even have to take my word for it. In New Jersey, my attorney general was a Democrat, and I appoint the attorney general in my state. We don't elect them; we appoint them. Listen. The governor of New Jersey is like the greatest job ever. We appoint everyone. Everyone. I am the only statewide elected official in the state government, and so I appoint the attorney general. I appoint the state treasurer. I appoint everybody. So yeah, I had a Democrat as attorney general. My commissioner of human services was a Democrat. My commissioner of corrections was a Democrat. I had, in the beginning of my first term, 6 of my original cabinet members were Democrats. And I did that because it's a blue state. And I need to make people feel like I've heard them. A lot of Democrats voted for me. That's how I won. And 60% of independents voted for me the first time. So I think you have to honor that. And my criteria always was the same thing. I needed, first and foremost, people who were qualified to do the job. And secondly, if they were of the other party, I just wanted them to know I set the policy. And I told them all, if there's ever a policy that I ask you to put forward that you absolutely, ethically, in your own beliefs think you can't, then you can offer your resignation. But I will always give you the opportunity to make the argument to me why your idea is better. And, I'm really proud of the fact that I, had a number of really good, smart Democrats who wanted to be a part of the administration. I think that'll tell you something too, that, they felt like they'd get a fair hearing with me. They felt like I'd give them the opportunity to make their arguments about whatever policy was before me. But I would do the same thing as president, because I don't know what numbers. It's not gonna make it like Noah's Ark here. We're not gonna do it that way. We're gonna do it based upon qualifications. But I do think it's important, given how divided our country is right now, that we have people the other party who have a voice. Now, I don't want to mislead you. I will be the decider. That's how I'm built. That's who I am. And I think that's what you'd expect of me. I will be the ultimate decider, but I will listen to that advice and take it in. And I think the most important thing you can have as president or as governor is a group of very good people around you who are all rowing in the same direction, meaning we want to make progress for the country. And you go and you make your arguments to me, and if you can convince me, you can convince me. I remember when I asked Paula Dow, who was my first attorney general, she's an African-American Democrat woman who worked for me in the U.S. Attorney's Office when I was the prosecutor. And I remember going to Paula and offering her the attorney general's job. Now, I'm offering her attorney general. A Republican is offering this Democrat attorney general of the state. And she said to me, give me the weekend, I'll think about it. And I said, I like her. I like her. She's not just jumping at the job. And so I would definitely do it. I did it before. It worked well for me. I think it worked well for the people of New Jersey. And I think it would work well for the people of this country to make sure that you're hearing voices. And by the way, then when you're trying to work with Congress and you have to work with the other side, hopefully you have people who have relationships there that can help to bridge that gap until I'm able to develop the relationship personally myself. And I think that would be another thing that would be helpful. Yes, ma'am. Yes, you got it. Let him get your microphone. Cool. Go ahead.
All right. Along the lines of cabinet positions, you seem pretty proud of destroying 832 programs.
Destroying, eliminating.
Sounds the same.
Yeah.
Programs
Not
in
really.
Jersey. Are there specific cabinet departments that you are interested in removing from our federal government?
The only one that I think has proven to be wholly ineffective that I would look at getting rid of is the Department of Education. And the reason for that is we spend about $400 billion a year on education in the country. All but 80 billion of that is spent at the state and local level, as it should be. So the federal government spends about 80 billion on K-12 education in this country. The states and localities spend 320 billion. I don't think there needs to be a federal Department of Education. I think that we should trust the states to be able to run the education system in their country, in their state rather, and we should allow that money to flow down to them for them to use as they see fit. because if you go to your local school board, you got a much better chance of moving policy whatever direction you want it to than trying to talk to some bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. that are thousands of miles away in some instances. So that's the one that I'm focused on the most. I don't think we need elimination. I think we need to do some paring back of how big they've become. And I think we need to move some of it out of Washington, D.C. I think everything gets too Washington centric and people lose touch with real folks. And then the only people we can get to employ are people who are willing to live in Washington. I think there are a lot of other people in this country who could contribute mightily to the federal government who don't want to move to Washington. And I think we should respect that by moving some of the department's operations out into the country so we have a broader pool of people to be able to pick from and greater bit of expertise. And the reason, by the way, I'm proud of either the elimination or destruction of those 832 programs, whichever word we use, is because the alternative was in one of the already highest tax states in the country was raising taxes even more in the midst of a recession, which would have depressed our economy even more. And so, believe me, it wasn't like I was overjoyed doing it, but I have to make choices as a governor. You can't just let things go. You can't kick the can down the road like you can the federal government and just take more debt. I had an obligation, a constitutional obligation to balance the budget by June 30th. I got in on January 19th. So I had less than 6 months to balance the budget. And so I had to make choices. In the end, I think those were the right choices to make for my state. And I'm proud of them for that reason. But believe me, there were some programs I eliminated that hurt to eliminate. But I also know that if I would have taken more money out of the pockets of my citizens who are already overtaxed, that would have hurt too. And I felt like I made the right choice. So pride, yes. But my pride comes not from the elimination of the programs. It comes from the willingness to make the choice, make the decisions. And it's never easy. Believe me. I sat in those rooms and had to say no to certain things that I know were important to some people. But in the end, that's why I made the decisions that I made. So you detect pride, you're right, but not for destroying things, for being willing to make the choice that needed to be made. You can disagree with the choice. Anyone's welcome to, and some people in my state did. But in the end, I kept my word. I told them I wasn't going to raise taxes to balance the budget, and I made sure that I didn't, and I'm proud that I kept my word.
Hi, I'm a current student at Emerson College, and I'm in a class specifically studying the spectacle that's going on within our politics. And many have argued that Trump has a lot to do and to blame with the current political environment that is happening in our country. But he's been absent at the last few debates, and we've seen the same level of spectacle going on with soundbite wording and seemingly petty catfights that have been going on in stage. So my question is this the bar that is set that we should grow accustomed to, or is there a sense of urgency to get back to a level of decorum and professionalism within our government?
You haven't seen it from me. You just haven't seen it from me. I have not participated in that. That's mostly been fights between Nikki and Vivek, mostly. A little bit from Tim Scott when he was in the race. I think they were arguing about the curtains at the UN ambassador's residence in New York. I didn't feel like I had anything to add to that. So, because I'd never seen the curtains, I didn't know if I liked them or not or whatever. And, you know, look, I haven't participated in that because I have not found any of the arguments to be the least bit illuminating on the most important issues that we have before us in this country. And so I think the only way to change and raise the bar is by your own conduct. Like, it starts there. And by doing that, you're trying to set an example for everybody else that, you know, we can have disagreements, and we do, but you don't need to have the circus-like atmosphere you've seen. Now, do I think Trump contributes to that? Sure, because politicians are pretty simple people most of the time, and they see who won, and then they try to imitate the person who won because then they hope they win. They're always kind of a cycle behind, unfortunately. And what people liked 8 years ago, I don't think they still like today. But I've been disconcerted by some of the stuff I've seen on the stage. And my view on it is that the only way for me to change that is for me to conduct myself differently, and I have. And if you look at the last debate in Miami, I did two things that nobody else on the stage did. One, I didn't get into that bickering with anybody. I didn't fight with anybody on that stage that night. And two, I actually answered the question I got asked by the moderator. And like that, I didn't like go, oh, wait a second, I didn't memorize an answer to that. Let me make sure, and I know you guys understand this from your own jobs. Like, that's not the way it works. You can't memorize an answer and then hope that's the question you get. And if it's the question you don't get, you give the answer anyway. Right? I mean, gosh, I look at Ron DeSantis and I think every time he's done like spitting out one of those memorized answers, he looks relieved. Right? He's like, oh, okay, I memorized that one. I got it out. And okay, go to another person, please. Right? This job is about being tough enough and a good enough listener that when the problem comes up, you listen to it, you process it, and you answer it. And you don't change your answer, right? You don't change your answer because you get some pushback. You saw this week with Governor Haley, right? She gave this answer about saying that everybody who goes on social media should have to register their names. No more anonymous stuff on social media. Well, okay, that sounds okay when you first hear it, but then you think to yourself, like the Federalist Papers that formed the debate for our Constitution that were written by Hamilton on one side and Madison on the other were anonymous. They were printed anonymously, back and forth. Why? Because Hamilton and Madison said, we don't want our political baggage to influence what argument people go for. We just want the arguments to rule the day. There are times when people want to express their opinion. They have a right to express their opinion in this country, and they don't have to put their name to every opinion they express. So she got pushback on that. Then she said, no. What I mean is, like, I want more civility. And if everybody knows that your pastor is going to be reading what you say on social media, then you'll be more civil. So then the response back was, so you still want everybody's name? She, in fact, said to one guy on a podcast, I want your driver's license, so I know that you are who you say you are. Then she got more pushback on that. And she said, no. I wasn't referring to Americans. I was referring to those Russian and Chinese bots. Now, look, I have no love for the Russian or Chinese bots, but I've never met a Russian or Chinese bot that has a pastor. So I think she wasn't exactly telling us the truth. She gave a position. I'll take her word for it. That's what her position was. But if you get pushback and then you start backing up, you keep backing up, you're going to back up right off the cliff. And so part of restoring civility and a higher degree of debate to our public discussions is taking a position and being willing to take the heat that comes with it. Because in this country, the only person who agrees with you 100% of the time is you, right? Nobody. And I've been married for 37 years. If I do like 55% at home, it is a killer week. Killer, right? Because Mary Pat's got different opinions. We've been together all these years, but she's got her own opinions and she's going to express them, and we're going to have disagreements about things. But you listen to other people, and if they convince you, you can change your mind. But not if in the political context you get a little pushback and all of a sudden, whoa. You got to worry about that, because then there's nothing you can count on. Who's going to be the last person in her ear? Will that be the person who gets the argument of the day because they pushed a little harder than you pushed or could push? So these are important things. And I hope that the next debate, it'll be down from 5 to 4. Now, Vivek will still be there, so I'm sure there'll be some comedy. But in the end, I hope that what happens then is that Ron and Nikki and I get to have a real serious discussion about our views. I think the last debate was better than the first two in that regard. I think everybody did a little bit better, and hopefully we're grading on a curve. We can get a little bit better in Alabama on December 6th. I intend to try to do exactly what I did the last time: answer the questions and tell you what I really believe, and then you can decide whether that's for you or not. Yes, ma'am.
So what is your plan to address the wall and the immigration issue?
Well, I think first thing is to remind everybody that this is a really complicated issue. It's not simple. It's not like I'm going to shoot him stone cold dead on the border. You've heard that one. And Ron DeSantis now has even doubled down on he's going to build the wall and Mexico's going to pay for it. Like I heard him say that on the stage. I'm like, am I in a time warp? Or is it just a guy who's a little bit shorter, darker hair, and less makeup, saying exactly the same thing? I mean, you know, it's a complicated issue. So let me tell you, I have 5 points on what I would do about the border. Point one is day one, I would sign an executive order to send the National Guard to the border to team with our overburdened Customs and Border Patrol officers. Right now, they're averaging 200,000 illegal encounters a month, every month for the last 11 months. And our Customs and Border Patrol officers, as good as they are, they're overwhelmed. They need help. So that's what the National Guard is there for, to defend our country within our own borders. So I would send the National Guard there to partner with them. Point two, I would add 10,000 new Customs and Border Patrol officers. They need the help. Now, the problem with that is it's going to take a year to get that done, because by the time you recruit them, train them, and deploy them, that's going to take a year. So that's why you have the National Guard there for that first year, and you could pull the National Guard back as you add more Customs and Border Patrol officers. Three, I would triple the number of immigration judges. Why? Because right now someone comes in and they claim political asylum, and they need to have a hearing to see whether that claim is legitimate or not. Right now it's 4 years to get a hearing. 4. So what do? We say to the person, sir, I understand your asylum claim. This is what you need to do. Here's a piece of paper. You come back here to El Paso in 4 years to have your hearing when we'll determine whether you can stay or not. And he'll be like, see you later. And gone they go into this big, vast continental country. And they're not coming back in 4 years to even run the risk of being kicked out. So triple the immigration judges, get that number under a year. Fourth, we have 200,000 illegal encounters a year. You know how many detention beds we have at the border? 38,000. Now, I went to law school because I was not good at math or science, but even I can do that math. That's not good. 200,000 encounters a month, 38,000 detention beds. So I would double the number of detention beds to 80,000. And that'll take about a year to do. But we'll have more beds to be able to detain people appropriately until they get their hearing on the asylum side. And then fifth, we have to change the immigration laws in this country. We haven't done it since Reagan in the mid-1980s. And it's a much different country now than it was 40 years ago, with much different demands. Right now, we have 6 million open jobs in this country, in this economy. 6 million open jobs. Now, if there are 6 million open jobs in this country, what that tells me is that means those are jobs that Americans either can't do or don't want to do. Now, we've had this problem over the course of our history as we've grown. And what we did was we brought in immigrants who had those skills to be able to do those jobs. So they could benefit from being Americans, and we could benefit from their labor to grow our economy. So we need to go back to merit-based immigration. Let's look at what areas we have needs for. Let's find people in other countries who have those skills, and they go to the front of the line. But if they come in, they've got to pay taxes. They've got to learn English. They've got to become part of our society. If you want to come here and work, you need to speak our language. You need to pay taxes to support what's going on in the country. No free rides. That's one. Two, what I would make sure of is that every employer then gets to use E-Verify, so that if you're hiring somebody, you have the comfort of knowing that they are in fact registered, they are legal, and you're not going to get yourself in trouble. And for those employers who are trying to skate around the law, that they're not able to do it. Now, to get those two things, we're going to have to give the Democrats something, because they don't want either one of those things. They don't want it. They want an open border. So to do that, we're going to have to give them something. That's when it goes to what I talked about off the top, which is figuring out how to make the best deal you possibly can to get those two things, which I think are so important, along with the other pieces of securing the border. Now, on the wall, I'd finish the wall. And here's the bad news. We're paying for it. No one else is going to pay for it. That's like saying, I'm going to build a fence on my property and my neighbor is going to pay for it. Well, we'd all love to have that, except I have never seen that happen. Right? So we got to be real about that. I think a wall is an important part of securing our border and cutting down on the amount of personnel we need to have there, which are very expensive. So let's do it. But let's be honest with the American people and say, we're going to have to pay for it. And it's going to be billions of dollars, but it's costing us much more than that to have all of these folks invade our country in a way that we're not controlling at the moment. So that's longer than the 90-second answer you get in a debate. But the fact is, don't fall for this stuff, shoot them stone cold dead, or I'm going to send the U.S. Army into Mexico. Please. Just what we need, right? We got a war in Ukraine that the Ukrainians are fighting. We're helping them. We got a war in Israel. We're standing by them and helping them. Now we're going to send our army into Mexico? It's not going to happen. I call that TV tough guy talk. That's TV tough guy stuff. And you know what happens to TV tough guys when they get in the real job? They don't do it because TV's make believe. And all of a sudden the job is real. They're not going to do that. And they're not going to, no American soldier is going to shoot somebody stone cold dead as they come across the border without knowing who that person is. Do they have what if they have a legitimate claim for asylum? Right? I mean, we just can't go summarily executing people. Who are we, Putin? We don't do that stuff. And so let's be careful about that. It sounds good, but you got to think to yourself, like, is it really going to work? Are they really going to do it? The 5 things I talked about, I believe make sense and can be done. And I have a plan to do them, which I think is different than the other people in the race. All right. Yes, sir, right there.
Thank you, Governor Christie. Just to follow up on the border situation then, what's your thoughts on what do we need to do about the Mexican drug cartels and all the fentanyl coming across the border? Because that's certainly linked to the border situation.
Sure.
So interested in your thoughts on that.
Much different story there. That's a law enforcement issue, right? That is a law enforcement issue as opposed to a border security issue. And so, you know, I did this for 7 years. What we need to do is to make sure we deploy FBI, DEA, and our intelligence communities to get intelligence from the other side of the border to find out where these folks are and how they're trying to bring this stuff over. Look, it is absolutely doable to be able to arrest those people and send them to jail. We've done it with a lot of different Mexican drug lords before. We can do it again. And Mexico, I would sit down with the president of Mexico and say, look, you got 2 choices here. The easy way or the hard way. If you want the hard way, then we're going to be sending law enforcement in there to arrest your folks, and it's going to cause you all kinds of heartburn. Or you can cooperate with us and give us intelligence and make it easy for us to get them. But I'm not going to allow your country to send profiteers over here who profit on American death. And that's what they're doing. So that's the first way I deal with it on the border with that. Get law enforcement there along with our intelligence agencies, work with the Mexican government and say, you know, I'll be very easy with them, very plain. Like it's one way or the other, but we're doing this. So how do you want to get about doing it? And I would suspect that most reasonable people after a little back and forth will say, yeah, we'll help you, because I don't think the Mexican president wants to see American citizens dying in the numbers that were dying last year, which 110,000 people nationwide who died of overdoses last year. It's now the leading killer among 18 to 34-year-old men in this country. We can't continue that way. But on that point, I want to just bring up one other issue that's related, but not directly related to the border. We have to do better at providing treatment in this country for people who are addicted. You know, the fact is, everybody, this is a disease. It's not a moral failing. It's a disease. It's like heart disease or cancer or diabetes. All those things have human behavior that contribute to them. All of them. And yet, we don't deny anybody treatment or make moral judgments on those people. We try to give the best treatment that we can for them to try to save their lives. But when someone's drug addicted, we think, oh, so well, they're getting what they deserve. They made a bad choice. They got on drugs. Agreed, it's a bad choice. But let me ask you this. I want anyone in this room who has never made a bad choice that they wish they could take back to raise their hand. You might be the only one. You, I believe. How old are you? All right. We have faith in you, brother. I believe you haven't. But you'll notice, what's your name?
My name
name's Adam.
Adam, you'll notice none of the adults raise their hands, Adam.
Yeah.
None of the adults. So beware. That's a lesson for you when you get old like us. Go ahead, Adam.
I
You
have
got
a
something
question for you.
All right, well, let me finish this answer and then I'll go to you next, okay? Does that work for you? All right, good. It's a disease, everybody. And we have ways to treat people now. We have medication-assisted treatment that can help people who are on opioids, along with the other therapies of talk therapy and the things that we have, Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous. We have these things, but we don't make them broadly available enough. And because we stigmatize it, people are reluctant to come forward and ask for help. And often they're reluctant to do it until it's too late. Now, look, I talk about this all the time. My mother was an addict. Her drug was nicotine. She started smoking in 1948 when she was 16 years old. And back then, they didn't know it was bad for them. She, in fact, read advertisements that said it was good for her. And that's the way it was sold back then. And she got addicted, and I watched my poor mom over the course of her life try every different thing in the world to try to quit, and she couldn't. Hypnosis, gum, patches, all these different things, and none of it ever worked for her. And at 71 years old, after 55 years of smoking, she got diagnosed with lung cancer that had spread through her entire body. And 4 months after she was diagnosed, she died. But in those 4 months, we talked to people about the fact that she had lung cancer. People came around her and comforted her. There was no treatment to really do at that point. She was too far gone. But no one looked at her and said, well, hell, Sandy, you've been smoking since 1964 when they told you it was bad on the cigarette pack. You're getting what you deserve. No one said that to her. Well, let me ask you this. If my mother's drug of choice was heroin instead of cigarettes, would I have told anybody? Would have I admitted she had that problem? Would I have reached out to people to try to help her, comfort her, provide her support? We don't do it. We're stigmatizing it in a way which prevents people from going forward. And then the first time we hear from them is often when it's too late. We're the pro-life party, but we better be pro-life the whole life. It's a lot easier when they're in the womb. When they get out, it gets a lot harder, right? But every one of those lives is precious. Every one of those lives is precious. The drug-addicted 16-year-old girl on the floor of the county lockup in New Hampshire, that life is precious. And we should try to preserve it and save it and give her help. The 52-year-old drug-addicted lawyer who gets hooked on Percocet because he's got a bad back, and then all of a sudden his life is out of control and he's an absent father and an absent husband. That life is precious too. And so, yes, we got to deal with supply, and I will. As a law enforcement guy, having done it and done hundreds and hundreds of drug cases in my career. But we also need to understand that we got to lower the demand issue in this country too. And the way to do that is to give the people the treatment that they need. We won't fix everybody, but every life we save will be a hole in the heart that we prevent for a mother or a father or a husband or a wife or a son or a daughter who otherwise would lose a loved one. So it's a big issue, and it's one that I care deeply about and feel really related to. And as president, I would talk about it that way to help give people permission to feel like it's okay to ask for help. And if you think that's impossible, I'll remind you of one quick analogy. Women never talked about breast cancer publicly until Betty Ford. And when Betty Ford, as first lady, was diagnosed with breast cancer, and she had a mastectomy, and she came out publicly and talked about it. She normalized it for women all over this country and generations to come. When you're sitting in the White House, you have an enormous opportunity to change opinions in this country. And Betty Ford did a courageous thing by doing what she did. And she opened it up for women to be honest about it and then to advocate for the kind of treatments we have available today so that breast cancer, in many cases, is not nearly as deadly as it used to be. And so I think as president or first lady, you can make a huge difference in that way. And I can promise you on this issue, I will, because in my heart, I believe that it's a disease and something we can help cure for people, or at least treat people to let them have a normal life where they can be a good husband or wife or father or mother again. And that's what we should strive for as well. Thanks for bringing it up. Oh, I got to go back to Adam. Right. All right, Adam, what do you got?
Do you think there should be an age limit for members of Congress? For example, maybe a 75-year age limit.
You know, when I was your age, I thought 70 was pretty old. Where I am now, not so much. No, you know what, Adam? It's a really good question. And here's what I'd say to you. We can impose the age limit ourselves. I think we can tell most of the time when someone's gotten too old, right? So like for some people, 75, they're as good as they were when they were 60. And for some people, when they're 75, age catches up to them much more quickly and they're not as quick as they used to be or maybe as sharp as they used to be. So here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to give you the responsibility as a voter, okay? That we can look at somebody and know when maybe it's time for them to end their service and go home. You know, in New Jersey, we have a law that says that judges have to retire at 70. But you know, I've met a lot of judges that have to retire and they're still pretty young and vital at 70 and can still do the job. And we're missing out on a lot of people because we set an arbitrary date. So what I would say is, let's let the voters decide. And I trust you 8 years, only 8 years from now. You know, in the presidential races, I'm retiring from my second term. You're going to get to vote for the next president. And when you take that responsibility, I hope that you watch and you only vote for people who you think are telling you the truth and people who you think are up for the job. That doesn't matter whether they're 25 or 75. That's what you should ask of them. So that's the way I would deal with it, Adam. That's a good question. Thank you. Absolutely. I'm here. Thank you, buddy. Let's go to the gentleman in the back there. Yep, you right there.
Thanks for coming out. You know, a
Thank
lot
you.
of good wisdom to impart tonight, and happy Thanksgiving to you and your family. Okay, but you're on record saying back in August 23 that we can't disarm ourselves economically while we convert to cleaner energy, and went on to advocate for nuclear power expansion. And yes, we have a voracious, seemingly insatiable appetite for power in this country, but as witnessed in the recent 5th National Climate Assessment, we're a country and the state of New Hampshire at an even more critical point in global warming. So, and so I got more to this, but I'm going to cut it short. Okay, you mentioned nuclear and fission, we would presume, but as we know, nuclear plant build-outs are prohibitively expensive and when compared to rapidly decreasing renewable energy costs. What would be, as the climate changes, maybe policy has to change, what would be your changes if it gets far worse, which it will do?
Well, first of all, let me be clear on this. I believe that climate change is real, and I think that human behavior contributes to it. And I think that's just being awake and alive in 2023. I just don't think you could come to any other conclusion. Now, the question is, what do we do? And I absolutely said that, and I believe it. And the reason I believe it is because in New Jersey, we're the most densely populated state in the country. And 53% of our electricity is generated by nuclear power, which adds, as you know, nothing to the carbon footprint. And so what I'm saying about nuclear power is not the sole solution, but it is one that we've abandoned since 3 Mile Island. There have been very few new nuclear power plants built since the late 70s. And you know that the technology now is so much better than it was back then and can be operated so much more safely. And so I believe nuclear has to be a big part of it because of the climate and because, unlike other energies at the moment that don't have an impact on climate, it's much more reliable. I have no problem with wind and solar, but they still are not perfected to the point where you can count on them to carry baseload electricity for the grid. And so we need to be able to do both things at once. I'm all fine with electric vehicles, but I want you to choose when you want an electric vehicle, if you ever want an electric vehicle. And when good, and that's great, and you have the choice to do it. But like if you lived in California this summer, Governor Newsom sent out advisory saying don't plug in your car because you'll crash the grid. Well, an electric car that's not plugged in is a planter, right? So like we got to be smart about this and convert. So I believe that We should be using natural gas, which has less of an impact on climate than oil or coal for certain. As we convert and so like for instance, when I was governor of New Jersey, we were the second largest solar producing state in the country when I was governor. Now, like you wouldn't think that about New Jersey, right? But we did it because we made a commitment to it. But even so, it was single digits percentage of what we needed for our base load in running our grid. So I think we need to continue to use American innovation to make wind and solar more reliable. In the interim, to be sensitive to the climate, which I think we need to be, let's expand nuclear. And let's let nuclear provide that electricity that we need in this country to grow jobs, but also to run our homes, to run our schools, on the other things that we need to do. I think our old worries about nuclear are outdated, and we need to add that to the mix in a much greater amount. I authorized the building of 2 natural gas pipelines from Pennsylvania to New Jersey. I think you should be able to have a natural gas pipeline here in New Hampshire. And I think the fact that the state of New York prevents you from doing that in the main is unfair. I think you should have access to it because it's not like you've got some other alternative that's cleaner to heat your homes as we start to get cold now. Most of you are gonna be using home heating oil, and that's not cleaner than natural gas. And it's often more expensive. So a lot of the alternatives are not as broadly available yet. I continue to think we should invest in those, and American innovation should get them better. But while we're making that conversion, like I said in that statement in August of 23, we need to expand the things that are reliable. And nuclear is a big part of that, and I think would be a big part of what I would be advocating for when I was president, because it helps the climate and it's reliable. So when you hit the light switch, the lights will go on. When you plug in your electric car, it will get charged, because we need to make sure that we do that. And when I say unilaterally disarm, let me be clear about what I mean. The Chinese are burning more coal now than they ever have. We, for the last 10 years, have decreased our carbon output by 1 billion tons a year. The Chinese have increased theirs by 5 billion tons a year. So this has to be part of our negotiations with the Chinese as well, because we're not going to fix the climate problem on our own, everybody. And if the Chinese, with over 1 billion people, are pumping that much coal residue into the air, we're not going to fix the climate change problem as a world. And so we need to get in with them and get them to start seeing it, that they have a responsibility too for this. And they're not in their industrial revolution anymore. It's been 50 years. They're out of their industrial revolution. It's time for them to become a part of the world that says we have an obligation to leave cleaner air and cleaner water for the next generation. And it's our responsibility to do that. And we've got to convince the Chinese it's their responsibility too. And I would work on that as president. All right, so I'm being told I could take one more question, which means I'll take 2, because I like to let my staff know that I am still in charge. So, hi. I'll give you mine. Go ahead.
Thank you for being here tonight. And I very much appreciate your support of addiction and treatment of addiction, because it is treatable. Thinking of that, are you going to add money into programs to treat addiction, or where would the costs come from to better support people with addiction?
Yeah, I would do it 3 ways. First, we seize so many of these drugs and seize the money that these drug dealers have. I believe that all that money should go towards addiction treatment now. It doesn't in the States, but it should. And, you know, the ill-gotten gains they've gotten from poisoning our family members and friends, that should go in to help treat those people. Second, I would push hard for Congress to pass a law that requires all insurance companies to cover drug treatment. You know, the fact is that this gets much more expensive when people are going to the emergency room every time and not getting regular treatment. And we know in all of our states, but especially up here, you know that people are going over and over and over again to the emergency room when they overdose. They get reversed, they come out, they don't get treated, they go back in. And it's enormously expensive and ineffective and inefficient. So insurance companies should be covering this. They cover cancer treatment. They cover heart disease treatment. They cover diabetes treatment. why aren't they covering this? It's because of that prejudice that says that somehow this is a disease that you brought on yourself. Well, go into any cardiac ward in any hospital, and you'll see a lot of people who have brought that on themselves through behavioral decisions they've made. Some of it's genetic, but often it's also behavioral. Same thing with diabetes, same thing with cancer, like in my mother's instance, right? But when my mother got lung cancer, the insurance company didn't come to her and say, well, you've been smoking for 55 years, so you're on your own. We're not paying any of your treatment. They paid for all of her treatment until she passed away. So that's the second way I do it. And third, I do think that there's a way for the federal government to play a role in making sure that, most importantly, our veterans get that care. And what I would do with veterans is this. We have to try to make the VA better. We continue to have to make that effort, but we can't allow veterans to only have to rely on the VA. And they come with such often with addiction and mental health problems that are a direct result of the service they gave to this country. And so in my administration, every veteran who's honorably discharged from the United States military would get an insurance card paid for by the government to go to any doctor they want, any place, so they don't have to wait in line for treatment and be treated like second-class citizens. They should be treated like first-class citizens. All right. Who gets the last question? This young lady right here. Here you go. Microphone's coming.
Hi, I'm another one of the students from Emerson College, and I'm wondering, how foundational do you see Trump's influence on the Republican Party's ideology? And do you think this has forced you to kind of rethink your own positions within the party?
No.
Not at all?
No. I mean, like, I believe what I believe. And I think if you want to be a leader, you have to stand up. Now, look, has he changed our party? Sure. Sure he has. Now the question is, do we want to keep going in that direction? And that's what elections are all about. Like, look, before Trump won, no one thought Trump had changed the party. When he came down the escalator in 2015, nobody was going, look at that guy. He's going to change Republican politics as we know it. When he came down the escalator, everyone was saying Jeb Bush was going to be the nominee. Right? I want you to remember something and keep this in mind with the polls that you see. And I'm doing pretty well in the polls, so I'm not going to try to talk them down too much, but they're not that accurate. 8 years ago, right now, Jeb Bush was winning New Hampshire. Right? So no one thought that about Trump when he came down the escalator, and things happened. And he caught popularity. Look, I'll tell you when I knew I was in trouble here 8 years ago. I was driving through Manchester one night in January. I was going past the hockey arena. And I was going to a house party where there were probably going to be about 40, 50 people. And there's this huge line around the ice arena. And I said to my trooper, because I was governor at the time, so I had state police with me, I said, is there a hockey game tonight? And he goes, no, that's a Trump rally. And I went, I think I have a problem. So there's no doubt that he brought a lot of people in who were very frustrated and angry with Barack Obama, with the dysfunction of politics. And they thought to themselves, hey, we got a businessman here who appears like he's been successful. He's going to go down there and, turn over the furniture and try to change things. And he's running against Hillary Clinton. So why not give him a chance? And it's changed our party. Now the question is, our party remakes itself every 4 years, or at least it has the chance to. We have the chance to. And now the question is, will we or won't we? I know you're skeptical. You're giving me that look. All right? How old are you? 20. I have a 20-year-old daughter. I am very familiar with that look. Incredibly familiar with that look. And you know what? You have good reason to make that look. Because if you look at the polls right now, he's ahead. So you would say, prove it to me. Okay, I'm going to try to. I'm going to try to, and you can be a part of it. You can be a part of changing it if you want to be. Like, look, that's the greatest thing about this country. Is in the same way that very few people thought he was going to win 8 years ago. A lot of people now think he can't lose. Let me guarantee you, he can. And you can do it right here, the same way you did it then. And unlike any other country in the world, we have the chance to do this ourselves. And most other people would die for that opportunity. And a lot of people here have died to keep that opportunity. And so I understand why you're skeptical. If I were you, I'd be skeptical too. But I'm getting out of bed every morning and doing this because I believe we can do better. And I'm not willing to give in. And I'm not willing to acquiesce to less. I'm not willing to acquiesce to someone who embarrasses us. I'm not willing to acquiesce to someone who makes us seem small all around the world. I'm not willing to acquiesce to someone who is the worst of our public discourse. I'm just unwilling to do it. And maybe in 9 weeks, you'll come back to me and say, see, I was right, you were wrong, you're naive, I'm smart. Maybe that'll be the way it'll work out. But it won't happen because I didn't try. And the greatest thing about this country is, you want to try to change your country, you stand up and you go to work and you try to make it better and you set an example and you fight for the things you believe in. And that's what I'm doing every day up here and what I'm going to continue to do, because I love this country too much for us to give up on it. And I'm certainly not going to give in to him. See, I'll tell you why. Because guys from New Jersey have been used to dealing with obnoxious people from New York for a long time. All right. So you guys have been incredibly patient and attentive, and I love your questions, and I appreciate them, and I hope I met the standard of trying to answer each one of them rather than dodge them. And because I'm a recovering lawyer, so you always slip into a bad mode there. But let me end with this. Being an American is a gift. It's a gift. It's a gift that most of us were given when we were born here. Or it's a gift we were given when we immigrated here and the government gave us citizenship. It's a gift. And I hope we never, ever forget that. We are the luckiest people in the world, even today, even with all of our problems, even with all the distractions, even with all of the division. There are people dying every day to get here, to get the opportunity that we have every day. This is still the greatest country in the world. But we got problems. And we can't ignore those problems any longer. We can't kick the can down the road. Now, I remember when I went to law school the first year, we had a guy who used to sit in the front row. And you went to every class together your first year of law school, so you're with the same people every day. And there's this one guy, he was just one of those guys. He was the loudest one in the class. He hands up all the time. He always had the answer. He'd argue with the professor and on. And I remember one day, the professor invited a group of us. He was taking groups of the law students out to lunch over the course of the semester to try to get to know us more personally. It was really a wonderful gesture. And one day I said to him, I won't use the guy's name because I know the guy's still around, but I said, how do you deal with someone like that? And he said, Chris, remember something. He said, the empty vessel always makes the loudest noise. And there's a lot of things that professor taught me that I've remembered. He also, one day he said to this guy, the guy would say, but what if this, and what if that, and what if this? And he answered a couple of his hypotheticals, but then after a while, he was just like, enough already. So he said, sir, if my aunt had wheels, she'd be a trolley car. She doesn't, so she isn't. Right. Next question. Right? He taught me a lot of really good things, but the empty vessel always makes the loudest noise. We have an empty vessel in this primary. We have somebody who has decided to put himself first before the American people and not treat us with the respect we deserve as Americans, but also the respect we've earned by giving him the chance to have been our president. The greatest honor we can bestow on any one of our citizens, we bestowed upon him. And how's he treated us in return? We deserve better. We deserve better. I love this country But you can't truly love this country unless you open your heart to its people. And that goes for all of us. We have to open our heart to each other. We're the richest, freest, strongest people the world's ever known. And we need to treat each other that way. And we've stopped doing that. Can't have conversations with each other anymore about politics or public issues without people storming out of rooms and yelling and screaming at each other. The hate we see in our country right now is something we shouldn't live with. We can have disagreements. We've been disagreeing since the revolution. That's fine. As long as those disagreements lead to a conclusion. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, but then you're on to the next one. We now have arguments which never end. We need to end them. We need to end them. And that's what's so great about this state. The Gov was saying it when he introduced me. You're first. You're the presidential wine tasters of America. You guys get to set the tone. Don't give in. Don't settle. Don't give up. Don't say, well, look, he's ahead in the polls, and so I guess we're going to have to vote for him. No. No. Remember something about those polls. He never led in one poll in 2016. Not one, including the exit polls. I was on the exit polls that night. They said Hillary Clinton was going to win 360 electoral votes and both houses of Congress. And Donald Trump won 306 electoral votes. The same way people lied to pollsters back then, I think they're lying to pollsters now. Because it wasn't politically correct to be for Donald Trump in 2016 against the first female candidate for president. It wasn't politically correct. And a lot of people didn't say they were for Trump. They went in that voting booth and boom, they voted for him. And when they walked out, they lied to the exit pollsters. Said, yeah, no, I didn't vote for Trump. I voted for Clinton. I think it's not politically correct right now in the Republican Party to be saying you're against Trump. I had a woman come up to me in a restaurant last week. I was walking out. I actually was walking by her. I was walking out. She grabbed my arm. And she leaned. She said, can I tell you something? I said, she goes, keep going after Trump. He's really bad. Go get him. I said, no problem. Why are you whispering? And she said to me, because a lot of my friends don't like to hear that. Let me suggest something about your state. New Hampshire doesn't whisper. New Hampshire's never whispered. New Hampshire stands up and is counted. Counted. And that's what I'm counting on you to do in 9 weeks. 9 weeks from tomorrow. It's the fourth quarter, everybody. And it's time for the serious people to make a serious choice. We've got anti-Semitism running around this country and people in Israel being slaughtered. We've got Ukrainians who just want to be free, having Russian armies invade them. And I don't know if any of you saw 60 Minutes last night, but 20,000 Ukrainian children or more kidnapped, and people having to sneak into Russia to try to rescue their own children and grandchildren. America stands up against that stuff. We don't walk away. We're the indispensable nation that not only wants freedom for ourselves, but wants to protect others from that kind of authoritarian tyranny. That's the way we were built. We got serious problems, and we need a serious president to take them on. I remember reading a book about John Adams, and they were talking about him writing in his diary near the end of his life about his concern for the country. He thought in 1826 it was getting too partisan, too divided, and we were forgetting our foundational principles. Does it sound familiar? And this is what he wrote in his diary for us. He said, I write this for posterity. He said, you shall never know the sacrifices that were made to secure for you your liberty. I pray you make a good use of it. For if you do not, I shall repent in heaven for ever having made the sacrifice at all. Well, I will tell you this. I'm here because I'm not going to be the reason for John Adams to repent in heaven. I'm not going to let him down, or Washington, or Jefferson, or Franklin, or Hamilton, or all the scores of leaders like Lincoln and Teddy Roosevelt and FDR and Ronald Reagan, who led this country during equally challenging times and led us to greatness. We can do that, and you can do it. I spoke to President Bush 43 last week. Before I got off the phone getting some advice from him, he reminded me of the thing he reminds me of every time I talk to him when I'm running in a race. He said, don't leave without asking for the vote. You make this argument to people for 2 hours and you expect they know you want their vote. People like to be asked. Don't screw that part up, he said to me. So, Mr. President, based on your advice and good wisdom, I'm asking all of you for your vote. I'm asking you to come out and make a difference. New Hampshire can change our party. New Hampshire can change our country. You are uniquely positioned to do it. That's why I'm here, and I will be here every week, multiple days a week. Over the next 9 weeks, you're going to be tired of me, but I'm going to keep going at it. I need your help. I need your support. I need your vote. Thank you for coming tonight. I appreciate it.